Presence is about being able to, in our most challenging situations, access and bring forth our authentic best selves.
In life, you can get off social media and avoid things, but when it's unavoidable, this kind of pressure and how you cope and how you can learn to lock in and be present and not be hyper aware of what other people are thinking about you, it's really difficult.
When people adopted those poses before going into a stressful situation, you feel more powerful. You feel more confident. People perceive you as more powerful.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Paradigm Shifting Books. Today, Britain and I are beyond excited to have Amy Cuddy here with us, where we're going to be talking about her book, Presence, Bringing Your Boldest Self to Your Biggest Challenges. Britt and I both have been unbelievably excited to talk with you, Amy, and
Thank
your
you.
work has made a huge impact in both of our lives. So we're excited to get into some of the specifics, but first wanted to ask you, I believe you're a native Pennsylvanian,
I
correct?
am,
Pennsylvania, yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. And are you an Eagles fan?
Who are the Eagles? What's that?
Yeah.
I am an Eagles fan. Go Birds.
Oh, that's
Go
great.
Birds.
Could go one of 2 ways. You could be a Steelers fan, so we w
No, 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 no. And my Australian husband could not be more excited that I am talking to
I love it.
someone from the Eagles.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
We love it. So I know Britt has some questions specifically related to Eagles and punt returning, but I thought it'd be good first, Amy, if you could maybe share with us, what is your definition of presence? It's the title of the book, and wondering if you could talk a little bit about the definition. What is when I first came across your work years ago and I saw presence, I asked myself the question, like, is she talking about being present, like in life, or is it more about bringing your presence to a situation? So,
Right. That's a
wondering if
good
you could
question.
expound on that a little bit.
Well, and we've already omitted one definition, which is what kids think when I say I wrote a book called Presents. They're like, great, it's about Christmas gifts. But it's
Yeah.
not about that either. When people think of presence, I think they often imagine this sort of transcendent state that's kind of permanent, and that you reach after doing enough soul searching and spiritual work, and you somehow ascend to this place, and you don't go backwards from there. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about our ability to, in our most challenging situations, access and bring forth our authentic best selves. And it's funny, I mean, since I wrote the book, in that time, I feel like, not just because of my book, because of the sort of zeitgeist, there has been so much discussion of the best self. Like, you hear the term so often, or authentic self, that it almost has become meaningless as that happens. um,
Yeah.
and so I've been saying recently, authentic bravest self. But to be clear, what I think of when I think of the best self is pretty simple. It's the person you are in the best moments of your life that also make you the sort of feel the most sort of sense of pride. The moments when you're connecting with others, when you are loving and feeling loved, and you are respecting and feeling respected. And often those moments occur with people that we know well, who we're comfortable with. So the challenge is sort of, how do we bring that person to these, work situations that don't feel as comfortable? Why would we not want to be that best version of ourselves in these sort of professional challenges? So that I think of it as bringing your authentic best or bravest self to your most challenging situations.
I love it. I think it's a lot less daunting than imagining, your best self as a constant state of being, like you said.
Yes.
And
it's almost, that can feel idealistic at times to get to that state where you're
Absolutely.
never regretting how you're but I think it might be good just for our listeners. Um, you mention a lot of different scenarios in your book, and you get so much feedback from people about different things where they're using this idea. If you could maybe just off the top of your head point out a few different scenarios in which this might be
Yeah.
important.
Well, it's so I usually ask people to think of the situations at work, or it could not be at work, and it's a lot of times people apply this. I'll give a talk in a work environment, and people come up afterwards and they say, "I'm going to tell my kids about this," or "I'm going to use this in conversations with my teenager," or so it doesn't apply only to work, but there's situations that usually feel high stakes where you know that you're being evaluated in some way, where how you behave in that situation has consequences, and we approach them with a sense of dread. So
Mm,
we do what my grandmother used to call borrowing trouble from the future. We sort of decide in advance that they're
yeah.
not going to go well. We get there, and rather than being in the moment, we're distracted and anxious, and we leave. And in some ways, it's interesting, but leaving, how we leave, is more important than any of the other stuff. We leave with a sense of regret. So we leave feeling that we didn't do all that we could do to get the outcome that we desired, but also to build the relationship that we wanted to build. And that sense of regret kind of becomes a weight that we carry around, especially the next time we're in a similar situation. So, presence is about being able to, first of all, see that these challenges aren't just happening in that very moment. They're about how we prepare for that moment, how we act in that moment, and how we feel after we've left that moment. So, how do we approach with a sense of, calm confidence, and interact with composure and attention, and leave with a sense of satisfaction. So for a lot of people will say public speaking. That's they bring that's still and has been for so long at the top of the list. Um, Even still, even in the now that we're doing so many things virtually, people still think of it as public speaking. It could be a college interview, a job interview, but here's one that is so common, and it may not seem intuitive. It's giving negative feedback at work. So people really dread giving negative feedback or critical feedback.
Yeah.
And they you'd expect them to say, going into a meeting where they know they're going to get negative feedback, but they actually are more likely to dread giving the negative feedback, which I think is a whole lot to unpack already. In some ways, I'm glad that they take that so seriously, because I think that treating people with dignity at work is so important. It's funny because I don't follow a lot of sports, but I talk to a lot of athletes and a lot of coaches about how this applies. I used to speak almost every year to all of the Harvard coaches, and a lot of them use this work. Use applied my work to how they coach their athletes, and it was
Yeah.
really interesting to see.
Definitely. I mean, I have used your work, and I, you've really put a name to a face for me in a lot of these kind of feelings that I've felt my whole life, as a punt returner. And for those that don't know much, like your husband, Australian football, right? but punt return it's just really scary. Like you are on an island, and it's everyone always feels when you're playing that all eyes are on you. Punt return is one of those few plays where all eyes actually are on you, and it can be very scary. There's a lot of pressure, and you have to be so present in the moment, because if you're not, there's such intricacies with it that you just will get so exposed. But then if you're thinking about that, like you
Of
explain in your
course,
book, it's a downhill spiral, right? Um, so there's a lot we can go into, but I've always, as I've kind of had trial and error with this, I've had to experience this on my own, for the good and the bad, and the positive self-talk that I have to do. I've had multiple people comment to me that they see me talking to myself when the camera pans to me, and they always ask me what I'm saying, and it's really similar to your affirmations. I've got some stories behind that I've
Oh,
learned to
it's just
say.
wow.
Yeah, but there's 2 things I wanted to kinda ask you about that I found very just oh gosh, some balloons just came up on
I
my
love
The
that. That was
balloons,
so
yeah.
I guess
nice.
they associate that with a birthday. Anyways, that's cool.
Yeah,
We'll
Aw.
have to put that on the show. But
absolutely.
there's 2 things I wanted to ask you about in regard to kind of where I need presence, right? The first is this idea of, um, I feel like when I'm back there at punt return, I deserve to be confident because of my preparation.
Yes,
But you talk about, you're not tricking yourself into confidence, you're getting out of your own way, right?
exactly.
To be confident. So that's the first one, and we'll circle back. But the second one, um, is you mention a fascinating study in your book about these people who are going in to do some public speaking and a presentation, right? And you have a group of them that don't do anything, and then a group of them that do positive affirmations and real positive affirmations, and you can
Yes,
go into that. And
yes,
those who do these positive affirmations before experience no spike in cortisol, right?
right,
Experience no spike in stress,
right,
even though these affirmations were completely unrelated
exactly.
to the speech. And so I'm curious, I wanna harness this, right?
Yeah,
And
I love
so
this.
I'm curious, those 2 things. 1, do you deserve to be confident because of your preparation? And 2, this idea of affirmations.
So much to unpack. I wanna thank my son, Jonah, who I hope you all will meet sometime, who I called before the podcast to ask about punt return, and he said, "Mom, there is no situation that is, like, more applicable to what you do than punt return." And he did a screen share. I was kind of panicking, and he's like, "We're doing a screen share," and he sent me something. He's like, watch this person." And I said, "Oh my gosh." I said, "It's like running into a wall of doom." And he's like, "It's exactly like."
Yeah,
But he
that's what
said,
it feels
"Also,
like.
mom, everyone is watching that person." He's like, "There's nothing else in football where everyone is watching you so closely as in this moment." I am just amazed, first of all, that you do this. So I just say, wow,
Yeah,
respect, massive respect to you for
thank
for
you.
finding it finding the confidence and the sort of belief in yourself to be able to do that. Because I like to know more about
Yeah,
the pieces that I don't know about what you do that got you
absolutely.
to a place where you feel the confidence to do that. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about preparation. You have to be prepared, right? You just do. And I think it's important for me to say that because one of the lines from my TED Talk that I think is repeated most often is fake it till you become it. And what I mean by that is that you have to sort of put yourself in uncomfortable situations enough times that you actually eventually realize that you are the person who's comfortable in that situation.
Brett, the first point you made around, um, deserving to feel confidence in yourself.
Yeah,
So I'll talk a little bit about Brett and kind of his process of not just preparing for the NFL, but college. So in high school, Britain was actually played quarterback, which you don't see because Britain's 5'8", not the biggest guy on the field.
the smallest.
So yeah. So when he went to college and Britt went to the University of Utah, he realized that his way of getting on the field, probably the easiest route for him was going to be through punt return. And his head coach, Kyle Whittingham, who's one of the most winning head coaches in all of college football, he knew above all else he wanted his punt returner to be completely secure, never miss a catch. So what Britt did, and I like to say I had a hand in this, is the summer before he went to college, we went out and we did 50 to 100 punts every day. We actually had a jugs machine that would shoot the ball extremely high in the air.
Oh,
and Britt would catch. So literally for about 2 or 3 months, Britt was getting 50 to 100 reps of catching the ball a day, so that when he went up to the University of Utah, he I don't think you dropped one punt as a freshman in practice.
Yeah.
And that basically got you on the field, and that work you put in not just is obviously helped you at the college level, but it translated obviously to
Yeah.
the NFL as well. So I I just love that concept of reminding yourself, yes, you can be confident because you have these wins, these small wins you've accumulated, internally yourself, that
Yes.
you can draw upon. And that's how I am interpreting bringing presence to a situation, is you can draw that out, like, instead of
Yes.
getting nervous and clammy, and you say, no, I have the right to bring this confidence out because I've paid the
Yes.
price.
You recall yourself in those moments doing it well. You know that you've
Yeah.
gotten through this, that you've not just survived, but you've done this well. And I think that is, I mean, that might seem obvious, but I think that we still forget it when it comes to our own challenging situations, that we have to do them. We have to keep going through it to get to the point where we're doing it well. And to do it well, we have to feel that we deserve to be there. We have to
Yeah.
have that kind of confidence.
Yeah. It's interesting, you know, T, that story is a good example because yeah, the number one priority for my coach was just catch the ball. Anything above after that was just a bonus, right? So that's
Yes.
what I worked on, was catching the ball. And for sure that all of those reps gave me that confidence, the whole trust your training idea. But it's also interesting. I think that there in sports and probably in business, there is kind of this glorification of someone who is a workaholic and someone
Oh,
who
yes.
who
Yeah.
is ultra prepared, and I do think there is a line, and I think you reference this in your book, of preparation, obsessive preparation not being the only thing that impacts performance, and I've definitely felt that in my life. I feel like, honestly, I've caught more punts than any person, you know, my age on the planet. I could attest to that.
Well, that's
Um,
probably
but I
actually true. That's
Yeah, but
probably
I
not
do
just
think
a
with that
percentage, but fact.
yeah, there is a point of diminishing return with preparation,
Yes.
and so I was wondering if you could maybe speak to that of, okay, I deserve to be confident because of my preparation, but I don't need to over prepare.
There absolutely is a point of over preparation. And it's when we've rehearsed it so much, we know it so well that we're no longer even having to think about it as we do it. And instead, that space that we had to use to think about doing it. And I'm not saying that this always happens, but it gets filled with anxieties about what else could go wrong. Right. I think that's what happens. So I tell people they have to stop sort of preparing the content or the skill and start preparing their mindset.
I
At
love
some
that.
point, you have to stop preparing, say, let's take the job interview. People prepare answers. The problem is that you don't know what you're going to be asked. And at some point, you become so prepared that you get locked in to a script that may or may not unfold because these people, some of the whoever's interviewing you might ask different questions or might just want to talk to you. But because you've locked into those answers that you prepared, you can't engage with them. You can't hear what's actually happening and
Mhm.
respond to what's actually happening because you prepared something different. So instead, we have to stop at some point. We know the answers and we have to instead prepare ourselves to feel that we deserve to be in that room and prepare to be engaged and interested in the person that we're interacting with. Um, because what happens is that people start to use these, impression management strategies, which psychologists just refer to as IM, impression management. And the more we use those impression management strategies, like I'm going to choreograph my body language or give a firm handshake or answer it this way, it actually makes us seem less authentic. because we're being less authentic and we're
Yeah.
less likely to get the job. So, in the research on impression management, which to me is a bit about over preparation and sticking to a script that's no longer working for us, when people use more IM tactics or techniques, job interviewers pick up on that and they are less likely to want to hire them. They want you to be you. We want to know who we're hiring. We want to know who we're bringing into our home. We want to know that we can trust that person. Let's talk about self affirmation. When people think of self affirmation, they kind of imagine this kind of comedy sketch where we're telling ourselves that we're great at something that we've never done before. Right. So it's sort of like you have somebody who's about to start a ski race and they're imagining the course, but they've actually never skied before. But if they tell themselves they're great, they'll be fine. We know that's not true. You have to be prepared and conditioned and ready for that challenge. Physically, or if it's an intellectual challenge, you have to have the knowledge, right, to do that thing. But even with those things, we're not always ready for the challenge because in those moments, before we are in that challenge, we start to feel powerless. We start to second guess ourselves. We start to feel like we're not sure who we are. Do we deserve to be here? And is there somebody better who could have been who should have been in this role instead of me? Those are the thoughts that people have in these situations. And that feeling of powerlessness, of what I call personal powerlessness, which is like a lack of sense of agency, um, it really changes the way our brains work. We start to feel frightened, shut down, not creative. We start to see other people not as potential allies, but as predators or competitors. We have a scarcity mindset, not an abundance mindset. All of those things put us into a sort of a position of wanting to withdraw or to shut down rather than be in that situation and be able to hear what's actually happening. So we can't just tell ourselves we're great and do it well. What we can do is tell ourselves who we really are and what things we really value about ourselves. So self-affirmation theory is one of the more sort of widely studied theories in social psychology. And the idea is that if you get people to really become aware of who they are, so you ask them, what makes you you? What are the things that if I took those away, you would no longer feel like yourself? And that varies a lot across people. So for some people, it might, for someone, it might be making music, being creative. For somebody else, it might be, helping my family. For others, it could be like there's so many different things it could be. You then have people write the top three qualities or characteristics that make them who they are, and then rank them, take the top one and write about one, a time when they experienced that, when they were really able to um, express that value, that part of themselves and how it felt. So that is self-affirmation. You're not telling yourself, so if you're going into a difficult math exam, you're not saying I'm great at math. You're saying no matter what happens, I'm still going to be the person who cares about helping my family when I leave, right? No matter what happens. And when we anchor ourselves in that part of ourselves, it it makes us feel a greater sense of personal power and agency. We step out of the way of ourselves because we know that no matter what happens in this challenging situation, we will still be that person at the end of it. And what is so surprising, I think, about this is that it leads to us performing better in completely unrelated situations. So say I'm a person who said, making music is what makes me who I am. And then I go into that challenging math exam. I will do better on that math exam, even though it's completely unrelated to
Yeah.
music, because I'm not feeling that anxiety and powerlessness that distracts me from doing well because I know that
Fascinating.
I'm still going to be that good person when I leave.
It's
Yeah.
fascinating to me. It's and I think that especially athletes have experienced this because in order to kinda get to this point, you kinda have to go through the negative part
Yes.
first before you are kind of broken enough to accept that. We had on Dr. Craig Manning for his book, a couple months ago, and he trained Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks, and
Yeah.
he talked about how literally in the finals, the game before the finals, he came to his house and was at total peace with himself as a person more than a player, and then that led him to the best performance of his life. But
That's
but I just think that is such a fascinating idea how it can be unrelated, but this true affirmation of your core values of yourself impact that performance. I one of the most fascinating parts of your book to me was this.
I think it's amazing too, and I think it's such a we separate these pieces of ourselves out into these different contexts. Like, in this context, I can be this version of myself. In this context, I can be this version. And I think it hurts our ability to not just do well, but to connect with people because we don't feel comfortable in our own skin.
Yeah.
And so I think it's such an elegant theory too. It's so simple.
I wanted to say along this topic of self-affirmations that your book, it was a total paradigm shift for me because growing up with my grandfather and my dad, we talked, and Britt can attest to this. We had a lot of training around self-affirmations, writing down affirmations. We had our
Yeah.
affirmations for sports, we had it for school, like, so that was kind of ingrained in us from a young age. But kind of the shift that you just described for me was, um, the affirmations that had always grown up doing. It was like, "Oh, I am amazing at this or that," or whatever the thing is that I wanted to be, versus, no, you're affirming your true self. So
Right.
after I read that and read your work, I went back and redid all my affirmations to change it to be, okay, let's affirm my true self.
Yes.
And it's it's amazing the impact that's had in my life just the last few months, and how again, I haven't done it before, like a big presentation, or I actually have to speak in church in a couple weeks, so that's like the perfect place to experiment with that too, because I always get nervous before I have to publicly speak. And so that's a perfect place to kind of test that, is read these true affirmations.
It's so
um
true.
yeah, it's
I moved a year and a half ago to Venice Beach, California. I still, I had been in academia my whole adult life. I taught, undergrad, went to grad school, ended up at Harvard for a long time at the business school. I left, which was, I think, a shock to my dean when I went in to talk to him. He's like, "But why would you do that?" And part of it for me was realizing that that's not where so I cannot nourish my best self if I'm just in the ivory tower. So I knew that having grown up in, rural Pennsylvania, like really an Amish country, and not feeling better than different from really anyone, that although I love teaching, I like speaking to a broader audience. I like to be part of a community that is more diverse. And so living here allows me, so I roller skate a lot. So I roller dance, and I was a roller skating waitress through college, and I was a ballet dancer.
That's
So
awesome.
doing this, I love music, and so being out here near Venice Beach, where I have a huge community of roller skaters. I know this seems so strange, but this community of roller skaters, I mean, we don't really know w- each other's jobs. It doesn't matter. This community matters so much. This little public space where we can roller dance. It is the most supportive community of people. And I know before I do anything, I remind myself that I'm that person. I am the person who cares about that community, that place that gives everyone an opportunity to come out and do a sport that's almost free if you have a pair of roller skates. Um, and it seems, I know, so incongruous. I mean, me roller dancing at Venice Beach and then still going back to teach executive ed at Harvard Business School. Like, how do these two things go together? But I'm really fascinated to observe myself now that I'm out here, go back to teach there and realize that before I walk in to teach, I feel I do a better job by reminding myself that I'm this person who loves the full community.
Yeah, let me circle back then to what I do. Something that uh, I've learned to deal with and understand is what you talk about in your book, the hyper awareness about what other people are thinking about you and
Yes.
how others are perceiving you and how that leads to a lack of presence, right? You're
Yes.
so and I'll tell you, it's for example, I'll never forget my rookie year. Had a bad game the game before, and I come out here and they always announce the punt returner. They say back to receive the punt, number 18, Britain Covey. And all I hear is boo from my
Yeah.
own fan, right?
It's Philly.
And
It's
It's
and
Philly. Yeah.
impossible.
yeah, yeah, 80,000 people, boo. And so how do you when it's unavoidable, you can in life you can get off social media and avoid things, but when it's unavoidable, this kind of pressure and how you cope and how you can learn to lock in and be present and not be hyper aware of what other people are thinking about you, it's really difficult. And I've found different tactics that I've used, but even in, like you said, in a job interview or whenever I go speak somewhere and, I go speak at these schools with kids all the time. And for some reason, all I can do is lock in on that third grader who's not paying 1 ounce of attention to me. And that's the only person I think about.
Yeah.
And because I'm thinking about that little kid, then I
Yes.
get flustered, right? And this idea of being present and not hyper aware of what others are thinking of you.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, wow, I mean, isn't this interesting also that, I mean, what you do is kind of most people's like scariest dream, right? Like, I mean, like, because most people haven't, don't have this skill. And so it is, I bet a lot of people have dreams about this kind of sports situation. I kind of want to call them nightmares, but you actually do this, right? So
Yeah.
it seems like it is the perfect metaphor. I mean, to be in that position, right? Your name's being called. So these challenges that I talk about, you you know you're being judged.
Yes.
The stakes are high, and it involves multiple people. It's not just you in a room alone. People are watching. They are observing you. They're perceiving you. Punt return it's that times a million. Every one of those elements is so clearly, starkly there. And you have found a way to do this, but still there are situations that might throw you off. Like that third grader in the audience of the school. I think it's so, in a way, it's really important for us to see that no one gets to the point where they are able to be present perfectly all the time. It doesn't, you can be an absolute master, the best at one thing and still get thrown off. And I think the reason I say that's important is because we do have to be easier on ourselves when those situations don't go perfectly. Because if we get hung up ruminating, or what psychologists call in more jargony terms, post event processing, if we continue to process that and go, well, why didn't it go well? What if I had done this, with all the what ifs, all of the counterfactuals? It's going to be much harder the next time. And I think it's just so important to realize that there's no one on earth who's gotten to the point where they can be perfectly present and perform at their best in every situation. And that is okay.
Yeah.
Because if we let ourselves off the hook a bit when it comes to that kind of anxiety, we give ourselves much more opportunity to improve. right? To be
Yeah.
present. If we're so hung up on the fact that we were not present, we're going to be hung up on it next time we go into that situation. If we
Right.
say, "Oh, I wasn't," and I'm going to move on, and this time I'm going to be more present, we are able to be more present.
One quick thing I'll add too is I've been in the stands at Eagles games and other games when the whole stadium is booing my brother. And let me tell you, my reaction is one of anger and, you know, and frustration and feeling like this unfairness of like I'm gonna defend my brother, as he's back there. That was your rookie season, Britt. And I remember talking to Britt after games when he was kind of going through this phase where there was a few games where he was getting booed, um, and it took him like once he had a few good plays. Now I feel like Philly fans really love Britt, but there was those few games when Britt would just call me after the game and say, "Man, this it was clearly like weighed heavily on you, but I admire your ability through that somehow you were able to manufacture kind of that presence and confidence amidst this. Again, Amy, it is the perfect example
It's so
of your
my
work."
mind is sorry. I'm sitting here with my jaw open because like my mouth open because it is so perfect. I can't stop thinking about
Yeah.
all of the different applications.
Yeah. Well,
And
and
I want to can I can I become the interviewer for a moment?
absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
Let's think about someone who's applying to colleges and they're preparing to go to an interview, a college interview. Can I ask you how you would use what you do and your understanding of presence and preparation and mindset preparation? How would you tell them to apply that to a college interview?
yeah. Well, I think for me, one of the biggest things that I've learned, there's an interesting paradox that I've felt multiple times in games where when I'm on the sideline, I and I don't feel it every game, but some games when I'm just feeling nervous, this is what's great is I talk to some of the best players in the world. I talk to Jalen, I talk to AJ Brown, all these guys are the best in the world. And when they say they still get nervous for a game, that kind of makes me feel like, okay, this is a normal trait. Like you said, you're never gonna just outgrow this all the time. Some people
Yeah,
are better, but it's a trait, and or it's something you can learn. So I still get nervous. And it's such a paradox sometimes when I'll be sitting on the sideline, hoping that there isn't a punt return opportunity. And and it's so
mm,
strange because I'm like, "Okay, oh, thank goodness they converted that 3rd down. I don't have to go out there." But then I've had games where I'm hoping that, and then at the end of the game, I didn't get an opportunity, and I feel this relief, but I feel this regret at the same time, and it's such a paradoxical feeling of relief that I didn't have to, but then regret because I have prepared and I should, and I wish I wanted to, but I was fearful, but I've prepared so much, and I wish I got that opportunity, and that idea has really helped me come to grips with, I would rather be given the chance and fail trying than not be given the chance, and that's only come after many times of feeling that relief, and so for
yes,
for someone going into an interview, it's an idea of getting to that frame of mind as I would rather live with the regret of maybe having misspoken on an answer than the regret of not having tried at all. And like you said,
absolutely.
it can sound cliche, but you get to that frame of mind and it's powerful.
But it is so true that I now want the challenges. One of the things that happens when you feel powerful, personally powerful again, which is social power. And I think this is important because the word power brings out kind of weird reactions in people. It's if you
Yeah.
ask people what word do they associate with power, a lot of people say corruption. And so I like to be clear that what I'm talking about is not power over others. It's not hierarchical power. It's not power over resources. It's not zero sum. It is personal power. And it's a really important part of our well being. When people talk about happiness, as psychologists call it, subjective well-being, they usually think of things like lack of stress, um, presence of positive mood and sense of purpose. But they forget that one of the best predictors of like healthy societies that thrive, is a fourth part, and that is voice, agency, sense of personal power. So if people are happy and not stressed and have a sense of purpose, but don't feel that they have any personal power, they not really doing that well, right? If they don't have voice, if they don't have agency. And when we have that sense of personal power, it leads us to see challenges not as threats, but as opportunities. And I think that is so important. Like, if of all the things that personal power does to our brain, to me, that might be the most important, to see these challenges as opportunities to grow, not as threats to existential threats or threats
Yeah,
to our ability to do things in the future, to accept that they might not go well and we will still have grown in some way, and that when we cultivate that attitude going into it, we're much more likely to form relationships that have trust in them, that and when we earn and build trust, that's when we're able to influence people, right? We trust is the conduit of influence. And we can't have that if we go into a situation feeling threatened and seeing those other people not as potential allies, but as competitors or predators, as I was saying earlier. That's a great mindset to have. But so many of us have been in that situation where we think, oh gosh, I hope I don't have the opportunity to sort of
right.
demonstrate my skills today because it might go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. There's a great little 5-word quote that I repeat to myself sometimes when I go back on punt return, and it's to avoid criticism, do nothing. And and for me, more than anything, it realigns my focus of the whole feeling of wanting to not be out there is because my focus is on avoiding criticism.
Yeah.
And so to avoid criticism, do nothing. To me, that says stop focusing on avoiding criticism.
It's
You
so
know.
true.
So,
And
anyways,
can I circle back to my son's a musician. He's a music producer and guitarist, and he had a lot of stage fright. And he's actually, he really is much more in production now than performance. But and although he plays on the stuff that he produces, um, but what he realized was that the more that he did it without thinking about that criticism, but instead thinking about it as a growth opportunity, the easier it became, even if it didn't go perfectly. And some of his favorite performances were not perfect. They were the moments when he felt connected to the music, to the audience, when he felt that sense of connection. That was a victory, right? It was about that. But one of the things he runs into, he's in his last year at Berklee College of Music. And so he's producing a lot of young musicians, and they're really talented. And the music industry has changed a lot. So you don't wait till you put out an 8-song album. You're just putting songs out there all the time on these streaming platforms. And this the artists who are, again, so much talent. So how do you could be overwhelmed by that. You could go at music school, you're surrounded by thousands of talented young musicians. So how are you going to compete? Well, you're not going to get anywhere if you don't put stuff out there. And what
yeah,
happens is that he'll produce a first song for someone, and they're really talented and the song's great. And it's he's worked on it for so long. And then right before they're about to drop it, to release it, that person is like, I want to hold on to it a while longer. And he
mm,
at first thought, am I doing something wrong? Did that they change their mind right before we're about to drop the song? But it's so common for these music school students to be afraid of putting something out there. But
Mm,
what's interesting in music now is that if it doesn't take off, it doesn't hurt you. You just got to
right.
keep putting stuff out there, and eventually one of them will. And a Berkeley professor told me before Jonah started there, he told me that the artists that take off, the Berkeley College of Music, again, I want to say Berkeley College of Music because I'm not talking about UC Berkeley. The students who end up, the artists who end up doing well, um, who end up, gaining a following, put out about 65 singles before something
Mm.
takes off. So those they have to be okay with 65 songs that they loved, that they wrote that means so much to them. And people are like, yeah, whatever. And that's a lot of criticism to be able to take. And it's not even direct criticism necessarily, but they have to be willing to have things kind of flop to get to that one that doesn't, and that opens the door to more opportunity. Because
Mm,
as when we feel more powerful, we are more likely to approach. It activates our approach system, and as we approach, the world expands. The world of opportunities expands to us.
My mind is like totally blown
Sorry.
tonight from all this. This is awesome. And I think a lot of this, what we've talked about, is a good segue into talking about personal power and the power of uh, power poses,
Yes.
which again is something that I think you made famous from your TED talk, and then obviously your book. So a few things from the book that stood out to me that I kind of liked, and then I want to ask you about some specifics. Was this idea of a power pose is the way you describe it in the book is something that's open and strong, grounded and confident, comfortable and poised, grounded, confident, and solid,
Yes.
versus a low power pose would be awkward and tense, scared and lonely, stupid and embarrassed, closed off, threatened and vulnerable, or very, very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I just love kind of the juxtaposition of the power pose versus the low power poses, and wondering if you would just talk a little bit about what is power
Yeah.
posing, what is it not,
Yes.
when can you do it, does it have to be physical, can it be mental, all all
Yes.
all the
Yes.
things
Yes.
around
So
that.
much. Okay. Let me jump in, and if you need to redirect me, please do, because this is a
Yes.
lot. But so first, let me say this is about the study of nonverbal behavior, right? We are communicating not just through our words. Of course, we're communicating through our body language, and our body language is our facial expressions, our postures, our movement, our gestures, all those things. We are conveying information about our emotional states through our body language. We know that, for example, across cultures, certain emotions are expressed the same way on our faces. So it doesn't matter where you're from or what you were exposed to. If you feel happy, you will. There's a good chance you'll smile. Or if somebody has wide eyes and raised eyebrows, it's likely that they're feeling surprise. Those are universal expressions. But psychologists, and there's some debate about how universal those things are. But let's just say they're quite common across most cultures. People had not really looked at whether there are postures that are universal expressions of a certain emotional state. And it was actually a researcher named Jessica Tracy at the University of British Columbia who started studying power and pride. She really was noticing that when people win in athletic competitions, what do? They raise their arms in a sort of V like shape. They lift their chin, they expand their chests, they tend to open their mouths and widen their eyes. And so it's about the most expansive posture that one might naturally adopt. And it happens in moments of victory without people thinking about it. They're not thinking now is time for me to raise my arms in the victory pose. They just do it. And she found that that was true across uh, 3 dozen cultures, 5 continents. When people won in that moment of feeling powerful and proud, they expanded into that posture. Even people who had never seen know, any television or anyone else compete. Or even she found that congenitally blind athletes did the same thing. So people who had never seen anyone else do it, do it. So this tells us this is a universal expression of feeling powerful, of feeling that moment of real strength and confidence and power. So the question was, could you flip that around? So if you're not feeling powerful, what if you adopted an expansive posture? Would it make you feel powerful? Because we know that when it comes to facial expressions, that is true. When you get people to smile in a way that causes not just the outside of the mouth to turn upward, but also the muscles around the eyes to contract. So a sort of real smile, it actually makes them feel happier, even if they don't want to. If they're feeling stubborn about it, if you get them to smile, they will feel better. Um, but the same is true for some of these other expressions. Like if you adopt an expression of surprise for long enough, you will start to feel a bit of anxiety. So can you do the same thing with posture? And, we started by looking at these very kind of conspicuous power poses, like the Wonder Woman pose, standing with your hands on your hips and your feet apart, or the victory pose, as I was saying earlier, or one that you really would not want to do in front of other people, but your feet up on the desk and your hands behind your head, like this. These are all things that people do when they're feeling powerful and confident. Yeah, exactly. There you
All
go.
these, yeah, there it is.
There they
From the
are.
book, if you're watching, I'm showing it on the
Yes, I
screen,
have
so
them too right here. So, but this is funny because this is the reason I use the doll on the cover. This is actually one of those push-up dolls where it's elastic. You press the bottom and it collapses. Um, when you take the pressure off of yourself, that's when you feel more
mean,
powerful. When you put the pressure on, people start to collapse. So that's where that idea came from. But so what we found was that when people adopted those poses before going into a stressful situation, not in the stressful situation, because most people are not playing a professional sport where, adopting a powerful pose would be acceptable in public. But if you do this before you go in, you feel more powerful. You feel more confident. People perceive you as more powerful. You perform better than if you do what we tend to do before challenging situations, which is contract and adopt these powerless postures. So if you look at, if you do an image search, say for job interview waiting room, you're likely to find pictures of people like this who are, touching their faces, their necks, their heads, wrapping themselves up. That's what we do when we feel powerless. We contract. We are afraid, right? We are protecting ourselves. We don't want to be picked off by a predator. And that is not preparing us to do well in these challenging situations. It's not just power poses, but we see now any nonverbal way of expanding leads people to feel more powerful. So breathing more deeply and slowly, which is more expansive, makes people feel more powerful. Speaking more slowly, which takes up temporal space, makes people feel more powerful. Simply sitting up straight, which is more expansive than this, makes people feel more powerful, which is really important when you think about using your phone and how much time we spend collapsed over a phone. You have physical therapists who are now treating teenage boys who are having, the same kinds of spine issues that they're used to seeing in older, elderly women. We spend so much time in that contractive posture that it is affecting the way that we feel about ourselves. So sitting up straight, walking by taking longer strides and swinging our arms, all of these different things. There really aren't exceptions. When we expand, whether it's in this small way, like breathing more deeply and slowly, or by adopting this posture, it leads us to feel more powerful.
so if I just wanna make sure I understand and kinda repeat back for the audience. So if I what I'm hearing you say, um, because that was one of the questions when I first came across your work, I'm like, "Am I gonna be, like, in a meeting and, like, stand up and, do a power pose, this kinda stuff?" Like, that's really awkward. So more how you apply it to day-to-day life, outside of a football game? Because Britt, I mean, you can, in a football
Yeah.
game, you can do all kinds of
I'll
postures
send
and
you a picture on Sunday or on Sunday after my game, Amy. I'll
Oh,
send you
I can't
someone will have a
wait.
picture of me, and I will be power posing for you, don't worry.
Yes, I love it.
yeah.
So exciting.
So outside of being an NFL player, it's more that, prior, let's say prior going into a big meeting, if you're by yourself and you're in a, private situation, you can do like some actual physical poses by yourself. But then when you're in the situation and in the moment, there's still a benefit, if you can mentally imagine it, right? Like
Oh,
that to me
absolutely.
yeah, that to me was powerful because,
Yeah.
for I'm thinking like in my day-to-day work and job and being in like a big presentation or something, and in that moment I don't, because of cultural norms, you're not going to stand up and do Wonder
Sure.
Woman necessarily. But I found it fascinating that even in those moments you can still manufacture it mentally. Am I?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's your body is constantly sending feedback to your mind. So the body mind connection isn't just, mind body. It's also body mind, right? If you are expanding, you're telling your brain that you are safe, that you are confident, that you may approach. And so you want to do this in a preparatory way for the most part. Although in the interaction, you want your body language still to be open and, respectable, but also to show interest in the other person. You're not trying to conquer them. You're trying to, form a connection with them. There's actually a really funny, it's funny how much power posing shows up in pop culture and TV show in comedy. If it's being sort of mocked, and by the way, I have no problem with this at all. What they do is they have the character power posing in this interaction, and it comes across as so rude and unlikable. I mean, no one really, in a meeting, you're not going to go in and stand like this, or in a job interview with your arms up in the air. But if you do it before you walk in, it really helps you. So, finding a bathroom stall, like so many people have said to me, I power posed in the bathroom stall before my job interview and I got the job. Or in your own, in the privacy of your own home or your office or your car even. Um, but there was a great scene from the first season of Ted Lasso, which I love. And Rebecca is talking to Nate and Keeley. Is that right? Keeley.
Mhm.
And they're basically saying, "But you're always confident, right? You always you don't ever have nerves about anything. You must feel fine all the time." And she said, "Hardly. Have you ever walked into a room full of football club chairmen?" And she said, uh, what she does before she walks in, and she acts this out. It's a great scene.
I know what you're talking about,
Okay,
yeah.
and she goes, "I look at myself in the mirror before I walk in, and I power pose." And she does this whole huge power pose where she kind of breathes in and
Yeah.
goes, it's over the top. But the point is, of course, I can't do that in front of people, but I can look at myself in the mirror and do that. And so when I walk in, I'm already feeling good. And
Yeah.
it actually, I cried when it ended up on Ted Lasso. I was so happy. I loved that scene, and they also captured it perfectly. It showed up on Grey's Anatomy, many like so many different shows, but she really captures the essence of what that's about. You're
Well,
not
w yeah.
trying to trick them into thinking that you're powerful. You're trying to show yourself that you're powerful. To to open up, crack yourself open so that you can be your authentic, bravest self, so that you can approach that situation and see it as an opportunity, not, not as a threat, to see those people as people that you might become longtime friends with or who you might collaborate with, not as people you're competing with.
Yeah, I like you're summoning your personal power is
Yes, you are
how I've
summoning
kind
your
of
personal
recognized it.
power. That's
And
exactly right.
ju
I'm going to say this very generically because it applies to so many sports. If a player misses, I mean, this can be true in basketball and tennis and anything. What do? They tend to look down. they collapse. Basketball, I think, is a great example because you're you're constantly missing. Like you're not going to get through a game and not miss. I mean, and have no one on your team miss. But if that person, when they miss, looks down, or in tennis, if they look down and collapse because they feel like they failed, they're making themselves feel even more powerless, right? So they're more likely to make another mistake. On top of it, if you take, say, again, basketball, take the point guard. If you have a point guard who collapses like that, and I don't mean in a dramatic collapse, but just if you watch closely and see their shoulders come forward a bit, they look down, the point guard is being watched by the other players, right? They're looking to see, well, how is that person feeling? If they're feeling powerless, then maybe we should all be feeling powerless. This is happening kind of unconsciously, but we start to mirror that body language and it becomes contagious. And then everyone's feeling that way. And so this tennis coach said, what do I do? I've got this player who's so good, like so much skill, so much talent, but she looks down when things go badly. And it just seems like she said, it seems that then it goes even worse after that. And so we kind of came up with this strategy where um, rather than looking down, she would take her tennis racket and stretch. So she'd actually lift it over her head as if she's stretching. And so she would be adopting a power pose. When she wanted to look down, she'd force herself into a power pose. But the funny thing about it was that it also threw off the other player. They'd be like, but she just failed and now she's power posing. We're like, what is going on? So it actually was effective in two ways. We thought it would just make her feel more powerful, but it made her feel more powerful. And it made the other person feel kind of thrown off because they thought, well, I thought I just beat you, but you're now not acting like I just beat you. So it kind of threw off the other person as well. So it's
Yeah.
the same kind of thing, same kind of idea.
Yeah, I think, so so many examples of what you talk about can relate to sports just because it's an easy public kind of example that everyone can apply, but this has been the argument for years with coaches and conditioning, and you're running and you bend over to get more air,
That's right.
and the coach always says, "Stand up tall." And then one day we had our scientist at Timview High School basically showed us how you actually get more breath by bending over, and so we went and showed it to our coach. We were like, "See, coach, you're wrong." You
Yeah.
know, and he basically he chastised it. He said, "You guys don't understand. This isn't about getting air. This is about not letting the opponent see you hunched over, you know?" And
Exactly.
and so
Exactly.
I've always thought about that. Anyways, um I love the concept of the science behind using power posing and your body almost as a stimulant and
Yes.
how that can change things rather than just as a result, right? Oh, I won. Uh, Using it as a stimulant that has real physiological changes. It's so inspiring to me because everyone can do that, you
Right.
know?
Right.
Um One just broader level question I had, why do you think society in general struggles so much with confidence and self-doubt,
Mm,
especially at this time?
oh my gosh.
And it's a broad question, take it where you want, but just
All
in
right, we've got,
general.
500 pages on this. There's
Yeah.
wow, there's I just want to say sort of disclaimer in advance. Like there is a lot of debate in psychology right now about this question, right? So
Mhm.
and people feel strongly about their answer, and I don't think it's one thing, but I do think that in some ways, in we are so focused on performing a role for other people and then basing our sense of self on how people respond to that performance of a role that we no longer have that faith in ourselves. So it's kind of moved us away from self-affirmation. So rather than affirming to ourselves who we are quietly or in our journal saying, I am a person who, here, I'll tell you, just like for me, I call myself like pathologically optimistic or, fatally optimistic. And It's true. I do believe, I see the universe as fundamentally friendly, not hostile. And I know that, this is a time, I'll just leave it at that, like where
Yeah.
people are not feeling good about each other. But that is who I am. And if I remind myself of that before I go out and speak or do whatever, I mean, actually, I love speaking. I should use an example of something that makes me more anxious. But before something that would make me anxious, I know that no matter what happens, and I know we're back to self affirmation, but I'm going to come around. I know that whatever happens, I am still that person. Even if what happens in that interaction goes against my belief that the universe is fundamentally friendly, meaning if somebody behaves badly toward me, I still will see that as an exception, right? And I'm not going to change. I still know I am that person and that being that person is not just good for me, it's good for the people in my life as well. I just think that we are so focused on others' views of us now
Yeah.
that we do not remember who we are. So when you say, I realized after talking about the authentic best self for a while, I realized that I was starting too far into the course. Like a lot of people don't know who their authentic best self is. So when I'm talking about like, here's how you express your authentic best self, I'm assuming that people know who is my authentic best self. A lot of people don't know. They know what they're supposed to look like. They know what they're supposed to do, but they don't necessarily know who they really are. And so they're just looking so much to others to affirm them or to validate who they are. They haven't had an opportunity to even develop a true grounded sense of confidence.
No, that makes sense, and I agree, and find myself having to root it out of myself,
We all
many
do.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you know who you are, and I'm just gonna guess based on what I know about your family. Like you did learn these things. I mean, you learned to know who you are and what you value,
mhm,
and that no matter what, you are that person. A lot of people don't learn that.
yeah.
Right. So they really have to kind of stop and undo some of what they have learned about themselves and find that there's actually a lot more depth there than they thought. This is getting a little off track, but I do think about, about this question a lot because there's so much I'm asked so often about it because the book that I'm writing now is on adult bullying and so what I call social bravery is called Bullies, Bystanders, and Bravehearts. It comes out next fall. It's a painful book to write, and people wanna know how do you bring out bravery in other people? We've got some work to do.
Britain and I were actually talking before this interview about the power of affirming others,
Yeah.
and that was
Oh,
something that our
interesting.
that was something that our grandfather and our dad are really great examples, like
Mhm.
at least in our own lives growing up, where they would just my grandpa would always just affirm people wherever he was. Random people he didn't even know, he would just, pull them aside and say, wow, like you have just beautiful hair, or
Yeah, that well,
you like
I love this. So that's actually this is really interesting because it seems 'cause I mean, at a superficial level, it could seem like what I just said goes against that, but actually, I think this is really interesting because that is truly affirming somebody. That is ultimately, to me, presence is about getting people to a place where they really see each other and, um, and can affirm them in that way. That is meaningful, genuine affirmation. But we're not getting that. We're getting these tiny little bits of of information from other people that we think is affirmation, but it's really not. I mean, that is beautiful. I mean, that is a gift to give to somebody to see who they are and be able to say, I see this in you. It's funny, my husband and son joke that there should be like an Amy Cuddy hype app because I really care, like I really care about seeing people And Jonah gets a kick out of like, I know a lot of his friends, and he's 22, and a lot of people don't know their college kids' friends, but I know them, and they'll be like, see me talking to like Jack. I see this in you. I know how deeply you care about this, and I'm like holding him by the shoulders and saying, you are great, and this is what is so great about you. Anyway, but he says it would be great to be able to press, you know, touch an app and have that voice.
I love it. We always joke about having a pocket person that you
Yeah.
could
Yeah,
pull out. So
exactly.
having
Yeah.
a pocket
Pocket
Amy
Amy.
Cuddy would be awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, like
But
full circle on that is and that's something our grandpa would also he would say to people and about people is that you are a person of infinite worth and potential. And
yes,
he believed that to his core. And I have found as well when people affirm me or if you affirm someone else, I mean that's a small thing,
yes,
as listeners, small
Yeah.
thing. If you're a person listening and you feel like you just like I don't know my authentic self, I don't feel like I have any worth, like I'll be the first to say that you do. Like you
yes.
are, you are someone with infinite worth and potential. And then if you are someone that feels more confidence in yourself, then let's pass that along to others. Let's affirm other people because it's just something the
Yeah.
world needs today.
Oh, I mean, absolutely, and I think, I often say, presence begets presence. When we are present with somebody else, we invite them to be present with us, and because we are giving our attention to them, giving each other our genuine, real attention is so unusual, and it's, and I do feel like we can do that. We can be present when we do feel personally powerful. And so when we feel personally powerful, we are inviting others to feel personally powerful. We're inviting them to experience that too. It's so personal power is infinite. It being personally powerful doesn't take power from anyone. Unlike social power, which is fixed and zero sum, personal power is infinite. And I think that's so important to remember. If when you say, what can leaders do? Make sure that the people who work for them feel personally powerful. Don't be afraid to have the people who are following you feel powerful. It's better for everyone, for us all to have that personal sense of agency and power.
That's beautiful. Well, Amy, we don't want to keep you. I know you have to go. I guess I just ask what one last word on anyone listening. If there's anything, obviously aside from read the book, everybody. It's incredible. I hope you know. If there's any practical thing that listeners can do tonight, tomorrow, um, to start into this journey and acquire this ability of presence.
Well, I would say make that list of what makes you you. What are the things that you value so deeply that if they were somehow taken away from you, you would no longer feel like yourself? What are those things? List those things and maybe rank them or just choose one and write about why does it matter to you? Write about a time when you really were in it, experiencing that, expressing that. And that will affirm you to yourself, right? You will have already learned also a bit more about who you are. And yeah, and the studies on this, as we talked about earlier, are amazing because people don't only perform better, but they are less anxious. Their levels of cortisol and epinephrine are lower. Right. So when you do this task, you're learning about yourself, you're feeling more powerful, and you're also reducing your stress. Um, and that's contagious as well in a positive way.
Thanks, Amy. This has been incredible. We really appreciate your time and your work and your presence.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.